Imagine for a second that you are tasked with protecting a highly secure, multi-billion-dollar facility.
Okay.
You spend an absolute fortune on the perimeter, right? You have motion sensors, retina scanners, like the most advanced cryptographic firewalls money can buy.
Right, the works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are preparing for this army of elite, high-tech hackers to try and tunnel their way through your defenses.
Right.
But what if the biggest threat to the global financial system isn't a hacker breaking through a firewall at all?
Hmm.
What if the real danger is just, someone calmly walking right through the front door wearing a highly convincing, completely fake name tag?
It's actually a massive blind spot. We spend so much institutional energy looking for the complex technical breach.
Yeah.
And in the process, we completely forget to scrutinize the welcoming committee. I mean, we build these digital fortresses, but we essentially leave the drawbridge down for anyone who just looks the part on paper.
Welcome to this custom deep dive. Today, we have a single, highly detailed source text we are unpacking for you, titled Application Fraud, the Gateway to Financial Crime.
And our mission for this deep dive is to really figure out how deceptive applications are used by criminals. Because we are not talking about someone stretching the truth on their income to get a slightly higher credit limit for a new TV.
Right. No. We are talking about organized criminals using deception to gain full-blown entry into the financial system.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because usually when I think of application fraud, I just assume it's like a paperwork issue.
Right.
Someone in the back office flags a mismatched zip code, they deny the account, and everyone just moves on.
Well, that assumption is the exact misconception that sophisticated criminal networks rely on. It is incredibly common for the industry to view application fraud as just a discrete, isolated incident.
Like a binary pass or fail at the front desk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the source text frames this entirely differently. It defines application fraud as a gateway typology.
A gateway typology. Yeah, meaning it is a fundamental attack on the integrity of the entire customer acceptance process.
So, meaning the fraudulent application isn't the crime itself, it's just the door they walk through to commit the actual crime.
Yes. Think about the mechanics of why the application process even exists. Financial institutions rely on that initial moment of entry to assess, who the customer is, what level of risk they present,
Right.
and what specific security controls need to be applied to their account going forward. So if a criminal uses deception to get in, that baseline profile is completely corrupted.
Oh, wow. So every single security measure that comes after that is basically useless.
Because those downstream controls, whether we are talking about complex anti-money laundering algorithms or international sanctions screening,
Even credit risk models.
they are all operating on a fundamentally false premise. I mean, if your system believes the account belongs to a 60-year-old retired teacher in Ohio, the algorithms are going to monitor that account based on what a retired teacher in Ohio typically does.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, the system is entirely blind to the fact that an organized crime syndicate in another country is actually pulling the strings.
I see. So if the input is garbage, the output is garbage.
Exactly.
The downstream security algorithms aren't looking for a cartel because the file says it's just a retired teacher. But hold on, how do they even get that fake profile approved in the first place?
Well,
Like, don't banks have massive automated digital security checks now? They aren't just taking people's word for it, right?
they absolutely have automated checks. But that brings us to the core vulnerability of digital onboarding. Criminals are incredibly adept at exploiting what the text calls the gap between validation and understanding.
The gap between validation and understanding. Okay, what does that actually mean in practice?
So in a modern digital environment, institutions rely heavily on fragmented automated checks to handle just the sheer volume of new applications.
Sure, because there are thousands of them.
Right. They check external databases to see if a street address actually exists. They run format checks on an ID document to make sure the sequence of numbers is valid.
Okay.
They ping a mobile phone number to see if it's active. The problem is, a machine doing fragmented checks doesn't possess human intuition.
Ah, I see where this is going.
A criminal doesn't need to prove deep, holistic authenticity to a machine. They only need to satisfy a threshold of plausibility.
So it is like a bouncer at a club who is only programmed to check if an ID card is printed on real plastic.
Yes, perfect analogy.
The bouncer isn't allowed to look at the photo to see if it matches the person's face, and they aren't allowed to check if the person looks nervous. They just scan the barcode, the machine beeps, and the bouncer lets them in.
That captures the mechanical failure perfectly. The individual data points validate, but the underlying narrative is a complete fabrication.
Wow.
And this is where we see incredibly sophisticated identity-related risks, which go way, way beyond just stealing someone's wallet. The text outlines three main variations.
Okay, what are they?
Well, there is direct identity theft, which is what we usually think of, taking a real person's details and using them without their consent. Then there is the use of intermediaries or money mules.
Where real people willingly open accounts to hand over control to criminals, right?
Exactly. But the most insidious method mentioned is synthetic identity abuse.
Synthetic identity abuse. I've heard that term thrown around. But how does it actually work? Are they just inventing a person out of thin air?
Not quite.
Because I feel like a computer system would catch a totally made-up person immediately.
And a completely made-up person would be caught. The mechanism behind synthetic identity abuse is much more complex than that. They essentially build a Frankenstein's monster of data.
A Frankenstein's monster?
Yeah. They take a real, pristine piece of information, very often a social security number stolen from a child, or someone who just doesn't actively monitor their credit.
Oh, that's dark.
It is. And they combine it with fictitious elements like a completely fake name, a fabricated date of birth, and an address they actually control.
Wait. How does a machine process half real, half fake data? Doesn't the system flag that the name doesn't match the social security number?
Initially, it might, but the criminals play a really long game. They apply for a small, unsecured credit card with this new hybrid identity.
Yeah.
The bank rejects it because the profile's too thin or it doesn't match perfectly. But simply by applying, they have forced the credit bureaus to create a new file for the synthetic identity.
No way. Just by applying.
Just by applying. Over months or even years, they keep applying for things. Maybe they add a manipulated payslip here, a fake utility bill there, slowly layering proof into the system.
So you're building a history from scratch.
Exactly. Eventually, the synthetic identity looks totally legitimate to the automated checks. They have crossed that threshold of plausibility.
They are essentially inceptioning the financial system into believing this person actually exists.
Yes, and it doesn't even stop at individual people. In the commercial space, the source details how they create entire shell entities.
Really, entire companies.
Oh yeah. They register a seemingly legitimate business, falsify the ownership structures, and completely conceal who actually controls the money, all to get merchant accounts or corporate trade services.
Okay, so they bypass the bouncer, they have their Frankenstein identity, they get the account approved, they are officially inside the building.
Right?
If I'm a criminal and I've just successfully tricked a major bank into giving me an account, my instinct is to immediately drain the vault.
Sure.
Max out the credit line, wire the money out, and disappear before anyone notices the name tag is fake. Why wouldn't they just do that?
I mean, some certainly do. That is what we call a bust-out scheme. But in the wider systemic financial crime environment, the motive is often much more strategic.
Strategic how?
The fraudulently obtained account is not just a quick smash-and-grab payday. The account itself becomes a criminal asset.
A criminal asset.
Yeah.
Meaning the account is the tool, not the target.
Exactly. Once that banking relationship is open, it provides the critical infrastructure needed to operate a much larger criminal enterprise. The text specifically details how these accounts are used to receive the proceeds of romance scams, move illicit funds across international jurisdictions, evade global sanctions, or facilitate something called transaction laundering.
Let's pause on transaction laundering for a second. Break the mechanics of that down for me.
Okay, imagine a criminal syndicate is selling illegal narcotics online. They obviously cannot go to a bank and ask for a merchant account to process credit card payments for illegal drugs.
Right. That would be a very short meeting.
Very short. So they use a synthetic identity or a shell company to open a merchant account for a fake online flower shop.
A flower shop.
The website looks real. The business registration looks real. When a customer buys drugs on the hidden network, the payment is routed through the flower shop's merchant account.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The credit card networks and the bank think they are simply processing transactions for tulips and roses.
That is wild. The financial system is unwittingly acting as the cashier for a drug cartel, all because the initial application for the flower shop slipped through the cracks.
That is exactly what happens.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Hmm.
If millions of dollars for tulips are suddenly flowing through a brand new account, wouldn't the bank's detection algorithms catch that immediately?
They would. Which brings us to a really chilling tactic detailed in the source. Criminals understand how these algorithms work.
Okay,
So they will deliberately use these fraudulently obtained accounts completely normally at first. Their goal is to establish legitimacy and build history.
so they are actively pretending to be boring customers.
Yes. They might open the account and just let it sit for a few weeks. Then they use it to buy a coffee, pay a small utility bill, or set up a regular, low-value direct debit.
Just everyday stuff.
Everyday stuff. They do this for months. They are essentially training the bank's monitoring algorithms to view them as a low-risk, highly predictable customer. They age the account like fine wine.
They are sleeper agents. They are just living a quiet, suburban financial life, waiting for activation.
And once they have established that history, once the algorithms have definitively categorized them as safe, that is when they drop the disguise.
And make their move.
Right. They exploit the account for serious abuse. They might suddenly receive a massive wire transfer from an overseas shell company and immediately route it to a cryptocurrency exchange where it can't be traced. Or they draw down a massive commercial line of credit and just vanish.
Wait, if criminals were acting like perfectly normal customers for 6 months to train the algorithms, how on earth do investigators ever catch them? The machine has been taught to ignore them.
It's an immense challenge, and it is why the source text emphasizes that institutions cannot rely on automated prevention alone.
It's not enough.
No. A mature control framework has to treat this as a life cycle defense. You can't just check the door. You have to monitor the hallways, the elevators, and the exits. The text outlines 4 critical pillars: prevention, detection, investigation, and governance.
Okay, let's look at how we actually fix the bouncer. Starting with prevention. If those fragmented check-the-box automated systems are failing to spot the synthetic identities, what is the alternative?
Institutions have to move beyond basic data validation and start assessing what the source calls contextual credibility.
Contextual credibility.
Yeah, we talked about the gap between validation and understanding earlier. Contextual credibility is how you force the system to actually understand the application.
Right, connecting the dots.
Instead of just asking, is this data real, the institution has to ask higher order questions. Does the requested product make commercial sense given the applicant's apparent needs, their age, and their geography?
Give me an example of contextual credibility failing. Like, what does that look like?
Suppose an 18-year-old student living in a college dorm applies for a multi-million-dollar commercial trade finance facility to import heavy industrial machinery from overseas. The social security number might validate. The dorm address might be a real physical location. The fragmented checks pass. But the context makes absolutely zero logical sense.
Right, an 18-year-old doesn't need heavy industrial machinery.
Exactly. The system has to be smart enough to flag the narrative, not just the data points.
That makes sense. You evaluate the story, not just the spelling. But even with context checks, some of these sleeper agents are going to slip through, right? The flower shop might look completely credible in its context.
It absolutely might.
That brings us to detection. What are the banks looking for if the criminal is actively trying to look boring?
They are looking for the exact moment the actor drops character. The source refers to this as focusing on early life account behavior.
Early life behavior.
Even if a criminal ages an account, eventually, the economics of their crime require them to move large sums of money. The bank's detection systems need to look for specific anomalies that expose the true intent behind the relationship.
What kind of anomalies specifically?
A classic example is a dormant to active transition. An account sits with a balance of $50 for 6 months, doing almost nothing, and then suddenly receives $100,000 and wires it out in 20 minutes.
Huge red flag.
Huge. Or unusual digital channel use like an account opened in New York. But suddenly, the mobile banking app is being accessed exclusively from IP addresses in Eastern Europe at 3:00 a.m. local time.
Right.
They are looking for rapid inbound and outbound fund movements that completely contradict the original profile they established during onboarding.
So the alarm bells finally go off. The bank catches the anomalous wire transfer. This triggers the investigation phase. But isn't the investigation pretty straightforward at that point? You see the fraud, you freeze the money, you close the account, job done right.
And that is exactly where many institutions fail.
Oh, really?
Closing the account solves the immediate problem, yes, but it does nothing to address the systemic threat. The source stresses that a mature investigation treats the fraudulent application as a critical intelligence source.
Okay, so you don't just kick them out.
Right, you don't just kick the criminal out of the building, you study the exact tools they use to pick the lock.
You want to know how the magic trick works.
More than that, you want to find out who else is using the same trick. Investigators look for linked accounts, shared addresses, and specifically, device overlaps.
Device overlaps, you mean like tracking the actual phone or computer they use to open the account?
Yes, exactly. A sophisticated fraud ring operating out of a basement isn't buying 50 separate laptops to open 50 fake accounts. They are using the same hardware.
That makes sense.
Every time a device connects to a bank server, it leaves a digital footprint, an IP address, a MAC address, specific browser configurations. If an investigator uncovers one fraudulent account, they query the database for that specific device footprint.
And then what do they find?
Suddenly, they might find 49 other seemingly unrelated, perfectly normal accounts that were all opened using that exact same laptop.
Oh, wow. So finding one mistake unravels the entire network. They pull on a single thread and the whole sweater falls apart.
Exactly. They used the deceptive application to map out and dismantle the wider infrastructure, which leads to the final and perhaps most crucial pillar, governance.
I have to be honest, governance sounds like the kind of corporate buzzword that gets thrown around in board meetings, but doesn't actually mean anything on the ground.
It often is, yeah. But in the context of financial crime, governance is the reality check. It is about ensuring the controls are actually working and not just creating an appearance of assurance.
Like security theater.
Precisely. Management needs to track incredibly specific metrics. They shouldn't just be looking at how many applications were rejected at the front door.
What should they be looking at?
They need to track how many accounts had to be forcibly closed within the first 90 days because of misrepresentation, how much early life suspicious activity is bleeding through the system.
Because if a bank's executives are celebrating a 0% rejection rate, thinking their onboarding software is incredibly efficient, but their investigators are seeing a massive spike in fraud 3 months later,
then their governance is completely failing. They are patting themselves on the back for a smooth customer experience while the vault is literally being emptied out the back door.
that brings up a massive tension here.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Because if financial institutions actually implement this massive, multi-layered fortress, if they interrogate contextual credibility, monitor your early life behavior, and track your device footprint, doesn't that just create a total nightmare of friction for regular people just trying to open a checking account?
It absolutely does, and the source text highlights this as the ultimate balancing act of the digital age. If an institution implements overly aggressive, paranoid controls, they create what is called exclusion risk.
Exclusion risk, meaning they keep good people out.
Yes, they unfairly impede genuine everyday customers. They introduce so much friction into the process that legitimate people simply abandon the application in frustration, which is a commercial disaster for any business trying to grow.
I've been there. I mean, if I'm trying to open a basic digital wallet to split a dinner bill, and the app asks me to upload my passport, a utility bill, take a video of my face turning left and right, and wait 3 days for manual review, I'm just going to download a competitor's app.
Exactly. But the inverse scenario is equally, if not more, damaging. If the controls are too weak in the name of providing a seamless, frictionless customer experience, the resulting poor detection hurts innocent parties.
How so?
Well, when a synthetic identity or a stolen identity is used successfully, the actual victim, whose data was compromised to build that Frankenstein profile, is exposed to severe credit harm.
Oh, right. It ruins their life.
They face account disruption, denied loans, and a lengthy, incredibly stressful remediation process just to prove they didn't open the account.
So the institution is caught in this permanent tug of war between security and user experience.
The text argues that in a digital-first environment, professional maturity requires navigating this exact tension. The controls must be rigorous enough to stop systemic deception, but proportionate and intelligent enough to avoid unnecessary friction for the vast majority of honest users.
A tough balance.
Very. Commercial success absolutely relies on smooth onboarding, but weak standards have long-lasting, devastating financial crime consequences that ripple across the globe.
Which means, whether you are a software engineer building digital products, a business owner managing merchant risk, or just a regular person trying to log into a new banking app without getting locked out by an overzealous security algorithm, You are experiencing the direct daily results of this tug of war.
Absolutely.
Every time an app asks for a secondary verification, you are participating in this massive battle to keep the gateway secure.
It is a constant evolving negotiation between risk and access.
So, to bring this all together based on the source materials we've unpacked for you today, the core takeaway is that application fraud is not a minor front-end paperwork issue. It is a foundational threat.
Right.
It is the gateway that corrupts the entire customer acceptance process, turning everyday financial accounts into criminal assets that provide the vital infrastructure for a massive, invisible web of illicit activity.
And if we extrapolate from these concepts, it raises a deeply unsettling question for the immediate future.
Uh-oh.
We discussed how criminals currently exploit the gap between validation and understanding, relying on a threshold of plausibility to trick fragmented automated systems.
Yeah.
But if they are already succeeding by manually cobbling together stolen data, what happens to that threshold as generative AI and synthetic generation tools become even more advanced?
Oh, man. That is a terrifying thought.
We are entering an era of AI-driven deepfakes, hyper-realistic forged document generation, and fully automated persona building. Will we reach a point where contextual credibility is completely indistinguishable from reality? What happens when a machine can generate a synthetic identity that has a richer, more verifiable, and more coherent online history than you do? If the facade is built flawlessly by an artificial intelligence, right down to generating a fake digital footprint and fake historical behaviors.
Will anyone be able to tell the difference?
Exactly. Will it become fundamentally impossible for either human investigators or risk algorithms to spot the fake name tag at the front door?
That is a staggering thing to consider and, well, a necessary thought to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you walk away looking at the digital front doors of the world a little bit differently. Until next time.